right, so thank you so much for joining me. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
So the interview is going to be split up into a few sections. A few questions about the Roblox days, a few questions, or actually just one question about Unturned Classic, and then a few questions about 3.0. The majority of the questions will be about Unturned 2, and then I also have a fair amount of community questions.
All right, awesome.
So, beginning with Roblox. While preparing for this interview, I watched most of the other interviews out there, and one comment piqued my interest. You said while you made games on Roblox that you had made hundreds of games. What were some of your favorites that you made while on that platform?
Oh wow, that's going a ways back. I think actually I remember you made a video about
Deadzone.
yeah.
Yep.
It's kind of crazy looking back at that and seeing just how different everything was. But anyway, to get to your actual question, um, let's see. So I think I started on Roblox in 2008, and
Wow.
then made games on there until the end of 2013-ish, because it was 2014 that Unturned released on Steam. And so I think some of the games that actually got popular on Roblox were, I think maybe about a year before Deadzone got popular, I'd made a game where there's this giant tornado that like sucked up all the parts in the area, and so it was kind of jumping between all the different bricks trying to stay alive. And so that was fairly popular, I think. Um,
That's really cool.
Thanks. It was cool for the time, especially. Um, and then I don't know. I worked on a ton of projects over the years. Like I remember making in 2012, I was really excited for the release of CS:GO, and
Mm-hmm.
in particular, I made a bunch of maps for CS:GO when it came out. But leading up to that, I made like a CS:GO on Roblox, and so that was a lot of
Oh,
fun
was
to
that
make.
Battlefield?
No, actually, that was an entirely separate thing. So then,
Oh, okay.
sometime after Deadzone, I made Battlefield on Roblox because I think it was just kind of a nice break from Deadzone, and my friends and I had been playing games like that recently, so it was nice to make something that
Have a
they were
change of
interested in
pace.
playing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. The only other question about Roblox is how far did development come along for Dead Zone 2 and what kind of major changes were made from version 1?
Development, how far did it get? Um, I think by the point that I stopped working on it, we had a lot of the core features. You could, there were like the vehicles that you could drive around, and there was a big map. Uh, there was a few different gunplay features. One thing that was very different about it at the time was that it had like a main menu, which I think that seems more normal for Roblox now. But back then it was like, wait, what? This game has a menu? And so then
Revolutionary almost.
there was like on the main menu, you could go into your global inventory and manage your items there and trade them with people. Because like back in Dead Zone, if you wanted to trade your items, you had to drop them on the ground, and so
Yeah,
it was really easy to like get scammed or something. Whereas with that, you could put together a trade offer like you would with Steam,
that's really cool.
and then from there it was straight into Unturned.
Yeah. So moving into Unturned, I have one question about Classic. So Unturned 2.0. Were there any maps in the works for Unturned 2.0 before you moved development to 3?
I think there was a Nevada map in the works at one point, which is kind of strange considering Bungo is still working on a Nevada map for Unturned 4, and then he also was involved with a big project that I think kind of fizzled out for 3 that was a Nevada map.
Yeah, he did stop working on 3.0, I'm pretty sure, for the Nevada map. I
Right.
think I'm still on his Discord. Yeah.
But yeah, I remember I think there was only one screenshot posted of the Unturned 2.0 version of that map. I mean, it wasn't the same as his version. This was before, but it had like the
Yeah.
Grand Canyon. That was one of the big prominent features of the map.
That's really cool. So moving right along to 3.0. What was your biggest regret with 3.0?
Hmm. Um, I don't know. I think overall I'm pretty happy with how three's come along, and I don't think there's really. I think at any given point, I think I made the right decision for the time. I think that back in 2017 especially, and leading up to it with 2016, I kind of took the game in a bad direction where I was focusing on like the dev kit and all these random features for maps that never really got used. And so I think that was probably the biggest misstep in the game's development, and I think that's when the game lost a lot of momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think there's also been the big shift in the game's direction where it's kind of like a PvP.
Focused on arena.
Yeah.
One thing that I have been enjoying seeing is all the quality of life improvements over the past few months that you've been implementing. I just think that's going to really help the game even last longer if some people want to stick with it, which is really good that you're still supporting it. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more stuff like that. It's weird recently with some of these kind of quality of life features. It's sort of like, I don't want to go back to work on 4 right now. I want to do some more of these. But I think 4 is definitely the future of the game. But who knows? In the long term, maybe 3 will. Every feature gets reworked and rewritten and stuff.
Yeah. So another question for 3.0 is, will you be updating the Unity to the 2018 version or 2019 version? And if you are updating, will this break the mods for the workshop?
I'm hoping to update. I think in general, it's good to keep up with the LTS releases in order to improve stability with different platforms and hopefully get some performance benefits, especially some of the like miscellaneous crashes that people run into. Like occasionally you get these really obscure native crashes posted. And so my hope is that those will get fixed if we update. I haven't tested it yet on 2018.4, but I'm hopeful that it won't need to rebuild the asset bundles again. At the very least, at least there's the master bundle tool now compared to the first time round going to 2017.4. But I think if it does break everything, then I might not update just because it would be such a hassle for the community again.
All right. Here's a fun question. What was your favorite update to work on in 3.0?
Definitely Russia. That one doesn't need thinking about. I think Russia was probably the best update the game's ever had, in my opinion.
It has some of my favorite memories as well. Like the NPC updates and just everything was so crazy to me at the time.
Oh yeah, that too. The NPCs were such a game changer.
Yeah. So here's the last question regarding Unturned 3.0, and it's about lore. And it is, what year do the events of Unturned 3.0 take place?
I don't think there's ever really been a fixed year in mind.
Do you have a range that you had in mind, or
I think
were you just gonna
in the
wing
very
it?
beginning it was definitely like the present, but then over time it sort of shifted back a few years. So
Okay.
it's probably like early 2000s or somewhere around there, but it's definitely not very locked in or defined in the story or anything.
All right, so that's it for Unturned 3.0. And moving on to Unturned 4.0 or Unturned 2. Have you reconsidered the decision to keep cosmetics out of 4.0?
There definitely seems to be a lot more interest in them than I would have guessed. There was actually a big post about that on the forums recently where players were providing a lot of different feedback on it, and it seems like it might be worth considering something. I think my main concerns were that in 3 they deviate from the art style a lot, and I think that's
Yeah.
kind of difficult to avoid, like in any game. I think even games that started out with very consistent cosmetic content, they eventually strayed away. So I'm hesitant to do that again, but I also think there
Mm-hmm.
might be room to do like some different things or new and interesting things since we kind of get a fresh start. For example, if we have a system where you like rather than just equipping all these cosmetics out of game and they're completely separate from the in-game ones and they override your in-game appearance, maybe making it so that in-game you can modify the appearance of an item that you have, but then it's also like an item that you can find in the world. The example that I
That'd be
always think of
interesting.
being that in Germany you can't find the astronaut suits at the space stations, which feels like a missed opportunity to me.
Oh yeah, that would have made sense.
It would have, but then they were in the cosmetic sets already. And when I added those, I didn't think there would be space shuttles in the game. But
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. So a few tough questions. Do you think that the long development time for 4.0 or the early announcement will affect the game or the community in the long run?
I think it probably already has had a big impact on the community. I think especially at the start, there was a lot more expectation that it would come out soon, especially with the way I was communicating at the time and how things did seem to be going.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the time I was really concerned about if I was starting on this 4.0 project and starting to experiment around, and it felt like I had just suddenly stopped working on 3 or that I wasn't spending anywhere near as much time with that explanation. I feel that would have been perhaps even worse. So I think it's good that everybody knew what I was working on, but it's definitely not ideal that that kind of interest has faded. But I think that in the long run, Unturned 4.0 will be a good game, and
And
hopefully,
bounce back.
yeah, hopefully people will be interested.
Yeah. So, what was the original release window for 2? Did you have one in mind, or was it just gonna come along as you developed it?
I think originally I'd imagined the closed beta being similar to how it is now, where now we've got more frequent updates again, and
Mm-hmm.
there's kind of a fixed set of players who've got access now. And originally, though, I thought that it would be out, what would that be, like summer 2018? And now here we are at the end of summer 2019, and it's still only just coming out.
Yeah.
But in that time between there, there's been a lot of changes to the game, and I think it's been good for it in the long run.
Yeah, I was listening to some of the other interviews that you've done, and you kept saying about how you've gone back and reworked so many aspects of the game over and over again over this time since you've had the time to do it now, and that it'll really help the longevity of the game.
Yeah, definitely. I think that initially I was kind of approaching it from uh, a more Unity-oriented mindset, as well as the sort of mindset I'd had developing Unturned 3. But because I had more time, I've been able to get a better grip on how I want to go forward long term with Unreal, and trying to do things in like the most optimal way for working with Unreal. So an
Mm-hmm.
example being that initially there were these item definitions that represented each item type in the game. So you'd have an item definition for an eagle fire and an item definition for a can of beans, but those were very strict data only sort of assets. So similar to how they are in 3, where you just have a big list of options. Whereas now they're set up that you can create a blueprint for different item types, and then that way modders can have all kinds of custom logic to go with uh, their item and completely override how the base game does things. And so while they fundamentally do the same thing, having exposed more of the game to blueprints and keeping it more open-ended in that way will really, well, it meshes better with Unreal, it meshes better with modding, and it's just going to be better in the long term.
That's really cool. Another question, kind of bouncing off of this, is has it been difficult to develop in Unreal and switch back between Unity and Unreal?
It's definitely a little odd going back and forth between the two code bases so frequently, but I think I'm very comfortable in both code bases now, and especially I think being able to read all the Unreal source code and learn from it and kind of improve as a programmer myself has also benefited 3. And so 3's code style is kind of drifting more in that direction, and um, it's probably made it easier for plugin developers too for 3.
The next question is what caused you to keep the original player model design instead of changing it up?
I think we're on to the 4th version of the player model now, where initially it was very similar to 3's, but then I decided to try and give more control over the different posing and improve the animation quality, which then led to like the Slenderman spaghetti monster, whatever
Yes.
you want to call it. And so that one had some benefits, but I think the current styles kind of addresses some of the different complaints that 3's model has, while still keeping the character, I think, where the spaghetti monster strayed too far away
Too far away.
Yeah, the new one, like the hitbox is smaller, your arms are a little bit thinner. Uh, it still has similar proportions though, and so I think it feels like the Unturned character while still kind of improving on it. And then also it solves some problems like with the arms distorting, and then of course the animations are just way above three's animation quality with like turning in place and all the different movement directions. And
Yeah, it sticks true to Unturned though.
thanks.
Yeah. The next question is, what has excited you the most about 2?
Ooh, that's a hard question. Um, I don't know. I think it'd be hard to pick any one thing. I've been having a lot of fun focusing on each individual little component and trying to improve the quality over 3 in every little way. And I think in particular, I like all the different environmental interactions, like how when you walk over the snow, it pushes
Leaves
the
a
snow
trail.
down. Yeah, it leaves a trail, and when you walk in the grass, it pushes the grass out of the way. One thing I'm looking forward to is taking another shot at the bushes, which haven't seen much love in a while. So I'm planning to make another tool where we can make it so that the bushes have the same performance characteristics of basically just any grass in the world, except it will bend out of the way when you drive over it or walk through it. And so that way it'll respond nicely to like the rustling sounds and everything when you're walking through those bushes.
That'd be really cool.
Thanks. So yeah, I'm looking forward to all those little details, and especially water. I think there was a video from early on in Forge development that had some water, but that doesn't exist in the same way anymore. But water will have similar sorts of physics interactions, like the waves and ripples, and having the foam along the ocean's edge, details like that.
That sounds awesome, honestly.
Thank you.
The next question is, what kind of goals do you have in mind for like a wider release beta?
So right now, what I'm kind of hoping is to bring the playtime requirements down towards the end of 2019. They're already down to 2,000 hours now, which is still a crazy amount. It's just that
Yeah.
right now it's just so bare bones that I don't want to expand it too quickly. But basically, I'm hoping to have more playability in the game. Like right now, it's just kind of if you don't have a server right now, there's nothing to do. So one thing that's sort of pending is the horde mode, which
Mm-hmm.
will probably be sort of placeholder, but I think that'll provide a way to test while still having a lot of fun in the game.
Yeah.
And then from there, I think there's a lot of quality of life stuff that needs to be done. Like right now, the menus are worse than threes, if that's possible. And so that needs work. The connection stuff needs work. Uh, there's a lot of little things that need work first, I think. I was
Yeah.
actually this morning, I spent quite a while tracking down a bug where if you entered in like an invalid address to connect by IP, like in 3, you connect by address all the time. Maybe you go
Mm-hmm.
online and find a server, you enter that in. Whereas it turns out that Unreal's expectation is that you're using like the matchmaking services, so you have a valid IP. So there wasn't actually any logic built in for if the handshake fails because the server doesn't actually exist. So it was like digging through
Ooh.
there trying to figure out where that was. And so now it will time out if you put in a bad IP, but there's just lots of little quality of life things like that that still need doing.
Yeah. So one of my personal favorite memories is getting home from school on Fridays after you seeing the tweets the day before teasing the update, and being able to mess around with all the content from the updates on Fridays. So in 2, will you bring back the weekly content updates, or would you shift towards infrequent large content updates?
Oh, I definitely like doing those Friday updates as well. It's nice to hear that you enjoyed those. It was always fun putting up teasers for the big ones and having something to show every Friday. I think
Yeah.
recently there hasn't been as much stuff to tease. Like I can't post a teaser saying, "Hey, guess what? The surfer list kind of works." But once there's more to do, and every week it's like, "Here's some new features. Here's some new content." Then yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing that again.
Yeah. So one issue that I had with some of the larger 3.0 maps was loot progression. I like the concept, but my main issues were the size of the maps and the fact that zombies couldn't follow you outside of the cities, and it made it to where you could just walk to the top of the map and start looting military locations instantly. And most people would just avoid the lower tier loot areas altogether unless they needed a specific item like a chainsaw, for instance. So my question is, will there be loot progression? And if so, how will people be prevented from just running to the high loot areas to begin with?
So one point you brought up there is the zombies not following you out of areas, and so
Mm-hmm.
I think we can basically guarantee that zombies will follow you around, and you won't be safe anywhere. Uh, Whether that's from animals or zombies or other monsters, who knows? But or AI bandits even. And I think loot progression is definitely tricky and very map specific, and
Yeah.
it's also like, especially when there's only one or two official maps in the game to start, I want to do it well. um,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot more room for, so like, I guess kind of the key thing with incentivizing traveling around the map and loot progression is, if there's these areas that have the best loot in the game that you need to prepare for, then you also need a reason that once you've prepared for them and you've gone there, then a reason to go everywhere else. Like you're saying, you basically just need the chainsaw in the low tier
Yeah.
areas. And so now that systems like the item system are so much more intricate and let us do things like uh, having different ways of repairing items and different ways of putting items together, I think we can have different mechanics that force you to go to other areas in the map. Like maybe you do go to the military base, but you can't get the items you need to repair your armor there. And so maybe the zombies will have an easier time killing you because they're like higher level zombies there. And so you need to repair your armor with materials from elsewhere. And so I think I'd also like to incentivize like both trading with NPCs and trading with other players as other ways to deal around with that.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, I agree that uh, having to interact with the whole map is important, but will
Yeah.
be tricky to get that all balanced.
Yeah. So one thing that you brought up was trading with other players, and that actually leads into another one of my questions. Will there be any incentive to teaming up with random players in survival instead of killing each other immediately, like in 3.0?
I think there's always going to be indirect benefits of doing that. Like if you're working together, then it's easier to deal with environmental threats.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I don't have like a this system will solve kill on site mentality checkbox,
Yeah.
but it's definitely,
A step in the right direction.
I think, I hope so. Um, I hope that we can incentivize that at least.
Yeah. So as of this month, what monetization plans do you have in place? I know you mentioned gold with an official and the official server pass, but has anything changed since that one devlog?
So there has been more discussion in the community about different like economy tie-in, sort of like 3 has, and I don't have any like definitive thoughts on that right now, but I do think it makes sense to do something as the beta expands.
Mm-hmm.
I feel kind of bad that right now basically Valve is just hosting this closed beta that has no real plan or anything. Um,
Yeah.
so one thing that's kind of in my mind is to have like an Unturned II early supporter pack sort of thing, where it's kind of like the Unturned 4 equivalent of gold upgrade, where it'll get more benefits over time and you get some benefits in 3.0, maybe like some special items for 3.0. And then as other features like uh, official server hosting become available, then you'll get some benefits with that. So I think that's the most likely to be added as far as the near term is concerned.
All right. Very cool. Will there be? This is a feature question. Will there be any visual damage to vehicles or bases if they've taken any damage in game?
I think bases is a fairly reasonable bet. Right now, the vehicles don't really have any visual damage aside from the windows breaking.
The windows, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think the next visual damage to be added to vehicles will probably be breaking tires. And so that'll be part of like shooting out the tires or spike strip sort of things. And then rather than 3, just the wheel disappearing. Because actually the problem with 3 is that there's like hundreds of vehicles in the game, plus hundreds, or if not thousands, of custom-made vehicles that don't have hitboxes for the tires. And so 3 did not have anything really in place to be adding that feature, and yet there was a lot of interest in tire popping mechanics. So with 4.0, you'll see the, what is it called? The wheel well, and just there won't be a tire. So you can put on a new tire, you can put on winter tires. So I think that'll be the next thing to get visual damage. I think it would be ideal to have some sort of denting and whatnot for the cars, but that's starting to get more and more complex. I think at the very least we can guarantee having some indicators of structure damage and making it so that you can kind of tell where the weak points are.
That'd be very cool. So how will official servers be handled? And what I mean by that will there be wipes and admins, and what regions have you considered for hosting the official servers in?
So that's starting to get a little bit complicated. I think there's a lot of intricacies with that sort of thing. I think wipes might make sense. I think
if this hasn't been planned out, it's totally okay.
I think what's most likely is that we'll get something basic going, and then it'll expand over time. Like all the other features, it'll be like now there's official servers that wipe once a week. They're chaotic, and then from there we kind of develop things out and build automatic processes for things, figure out how to handle moderation. Yeah.
All right. So a question about lore is, have you thought about what kind of story you want to have in 2, or is that still a low priority while you get all the game mechanics down?
I think game mechanics are definitely the highest priority. Right now, my thought is sort of that once we get the enemies figured out and get a better idea of what the atmosphere is, it'll be easier to decide how to go forward with the story then. I definitely want to be more considerate with the story than I was with 3.0, because Unturned 3.0 is kind of, there's a bunch of Easter eggs in the maps, then let's tie them together with the story, and then let's build on that story, and so it kind of got out of hand quickly. Whereas I'd like to better plan out, like, here's the longer term story, and then gradually fill that in through the game.
Yeah, I would personally find that very cool, so I'm excited.
Awesome.
Do you think that 2 will be the definitive version of Unturned, or will you continue to make major overhauling upgrades like Unturned 3, Unturned 4, Unturned 5?
Oh man, that would get confusing once there's Unturned 3 is Unturned 5.0 and Unturned 4 is Unturned 6.0. I think it's hard to imagine past Unturned 2 at this point. Like, let's see, so 3.0 came out on Steam essentially 5 years ago, a little bit more than 5 years ago now. So if we continue at this rate, and I definitely think it's going to be like another few years before 4.0 is even like released in quotes, and then it'll be supported for hopefully even longer than 3.0. Not to say that 3.0 will lose support, but just like updates. Yeah. And so I think it's hard to imagine why there would be a Unturned 5.0 at this point. But who knows? Maybe 10 years from now we'll be saying, oh, the early days of 4.0.
Yeah, who knows? But one thing that you said actually leads into another one of my questions, and it's, so with 3.0, it was in early access for a long time after its public release. Do you plan on doing the same type of thing with 2, or are you aiming for an earlier full release?
I think that I'm kind of, like right now my thought is kind of that it'd be nice to have the early access be something sort of closed and for anyone who's interested, like how Operation Maple Leaf was. and then once it's in like a nice stable state, then that's just kind of the 1.0 release, or the
Okay.
as the analog to the 1.0 release being the 4 point whatever release, and then go from there, continuing to update the game. So I don't know. I don't think we'd release it as like an early access game again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will PEI be back for a third time?
That would be cool to see. I do think it'd be awesome to see PEI in 4.0. And maybe it makes sense to make PEI as the first proper map. I don't know.
I'm sure someone will make a workshop map, even if it doesn't get in as an official one.
Oh, definitely. That's a good point. There's going to be workshop maps or workshop ports of every single 3.0 map.
Oh yeah. When did you start development on 2?
It must have been towards the end of 2017. And then
Okay.
at that point, it was kind of getting more familiar with Unreal and building out some of the core features. And then there was a while where I worked on map stuff for Pineridge, and then kind of gradually began working on redoing various systems and cleaning things up, and then it kind of led into the vehicles and more cleanup and rewriting things. But now I think we're kind of at the point where like people have access to it. It's coming along. There's weekly updates, and I think it's unlikely at this point that anything will be like rewritten from scratch again.
Yeah. What so far has been the biggest challenge for you when it comes to developing 2?
I think there was kind of a point partway through development where I lost a lot of motivation. Like I kind of burned out because I was working so much. And so I think over time that's gotten easier. Like I've been trying to either just work on 3.0 on the weekends or kind of keep a better balance. So I think definitely the biggest challenge with 4 was that point where I became burned out and kind of stopped working on 4 for a while.
Yeah.
I think the game, I don't know, I might not have rewritten as much stuff if I had just, if that hadn't happened, but I don't know.
Yeah. On the topic of passive and aggressive mobs, have you planned any passive or aggressive creatures or animals besides zombies?
Ooh, this is where things might get a little controversial.
Ooh.
I've been thinking a lot about other types of enemies. I think there's definitely kind of a, I don't know what the word is exactly, but like a lack of interest in zombies. Like there's not that many zombie games anymore.
Yeah. It's declining
Yeah.
in popularity.
And so I've been kind of thinking along the lines of like Stranger Things and like robots. And
Interesting.
I don't have any like exact plans, but I do think it would be fun to kind of branch out. And one idea I really like is if towns are, or like different points of interest are infected. And so there's more of like a organic mutation that's taken hold, like a hive. And so you can clear
Yeah.
out the town to make it safe, and maybe that attracts NPCs, and maybe then there's a
Oh, that
way
would be
to like,
so cool.
oh, I hope so. And then I was sort of thinking that there's a problem that if you can save all the towns and get rid of all the infection, then is there any challenge? But I think there'd always be like griefers and enemies trying to bring back the infection. So maybe there's some
Yeah.
way like you both have to constantly be mindful of the infection regrowing, and then maybe you can actively try and bring back the infestation or make it worse. So I think there could be a lot of like fun stuff to
Ooh,
do there.
bringing back the infestation to get loot. That could be interesting.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's good.
Interesting. All right. So one of the most popular types of servers in 3.0 currently is the creative mode, where you can spawn in almost anything. Do you plan to implement an official version of creative, or would you leave that to the community?
I think it makes sense to have some sort of official support for it. Um, I think ideally there's a wider variety of modes in 4, and the like core modes are more popular than they are in 3.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully better balanced as well. But I think one of the big problems with 3 was that there wasn't really anything in place to have different game modes. Whereas, and so then plugins kind of acted as adding extra features on top, making it so you can spawn things in and whatnot. Whereas with
Yeah.
4, there's kind of this, at the very center, there's the concept of multiple game modes. And so it should be a lot more straightforward to support different things like that.
Very cool. So one cool addition that I've enjoyed seeing in 3.0 was the curated system. Will you be implementing something similar in 2?
Right now, my thought is sort of that it'll be similar to how it is, I guess, at the time of recording, where there's featured workshop curated maps. And so
Okay.
then I think definitely one of the biggest mistakes in 3's development was putting those files in the core game files. And so I think that that's something I wouldn't do again. And instead, it would be like allowing creators to do their own updates and having their workshop pages, and maybe better integrating in the client too, like being able to browse the workshop from in-game and manage your mods from in-game and like enable, disable them.
That'd be very cool. And jumping off of that, would there be any guidelines for map makers to follow to kind of up their quality, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I'm definitely hoping to have better documentation. I think that the combination of having access to all of the source files, or at least the like in editor versions, will help with that. And then I've got some documentation put together already. It's not online yet, but it's kind of preliminary. Like, here's the different ammo calibers and kind of how to design bullets for the game and different things like that to help set a style guide and help keep things consistent.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. So, on the topic of experiencing and leveling and stuff, how will experience and leveling be handled in your ideal vision for 2?
Um, that's sort of, there's a lot of different conflicting ideas about that. It's sort of something that is on the back burner right now, like not something I've given a lot of thought about. This is how we're going to approach it. I think ideally what I'd like to do is design the different systems to work regardless of how the skill system works, and then we could kind of experiment with different ways of doing skills and go with what works. And so
Okay.
I think there's a few different models for skills that are popular in the community, and so I've kind of pinned a bunch of different discussions that I can go back to later and hopefully find a way to gel them all together. But like there's the different ideas of when you perform an action, you get better at that action. So like if you reload a lot with a certain weapon, then you get better at reloading with that certain weapon. You can reload faster
Oh,
versus like,
that's interesting.
yeah, so that's kind of like the traditional RPG sort of thing compared to
Chopping down trees and then leveling up. Oh, I don't have to take as much food.
yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, the put XP points into something completely unrelated. Um, so yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of different ways to do it, and ideally we can swap them out and try different things.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned bandits and NPCs and clearing out towns as some concepts that you have. What features have you thought about besides those that could make for a more immersive single player experience?
I think the first thing that will really make single player more interesting is just having a more dynamic world.
Mm-hmm.
With that being like uh, simple things like if you cut down a tree, it'll stay cut down. It won't just magically grow back. And having all the animals pathfind properly. Like I was hesitant to add any like proper aggressive animals to 3 because pathfinding was non-existent. Whereas for 4, if animals can actually be a threat, then animals can actually be a threat. And
Yeah.
different features like weather and more intricate medical systems and having these bandits to worry about in the environment and your relationship with different factions. So I think all these different systems working together will make single player more interesting.
That's really cool. How has the modding scene affected your plans for 2?
Modding is probably one of the most influential aspects of what I decide or how I decide to design different systems. Kind of one of my core focuses with programming the different features has been make sure this is exposed to blueprints and modding or it's not good enough. And so I think there's only one piece of code in my mind that's not very well exposed to modding right now, but um, modding is like number one of the most, or number one, the most important community related feature.
Awesome. Moving on. One thing that some people find controversial with 3.0 is the inclusion of third person. How would you like to see third person handled with the official servers?
I think right now my thought is sort of that there'd be first person only servers as well as mixed servers.
Okay.
I really like third person combat. I think it's
Yeah.
inherently flawed, but I still like third person combat. And so I think I'd like to have mixed servers, but I definitely know that there's a lot of players who prefer first person only, and so it would make sense to have first person only official servers.
Yeah. So, has the upgraded graphic style with 2 challenged you at all with modeling?
I think it's kind of been a natural progression there where with 3, the models created later on had to kind of be reduced down to match the rest of the game, whereas with 4, we can aim a little bit higher and try to raise the quality bar globally. And so I think the most important thing is keeping it consistent. And so with 3, it was kind of keeping it consistent with the 2014 style, whereas with 4.0, it's keeping it consistent with the 2018 style. So uh, I think it's something that I feel comfortable doing throughout the whole game.
Awesome. So, this is the last question regarding 2. That's from me. We have community questions in a little bit. Um, and usually it's like, oh, when's the release date? I'm not going to ask for a release date, but how far away do you think a playable game is in the sense that there's replayability of it? Not a full release, just, a map, survival, 2 or 3 guns, or something like that.
I'm just going to open up the roadmap here to kind of get my. So I think replayability wise, once there's a fun mode that you can play single player and multiplayer, I think that'll help a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So if horde mode is done soon, I think that'd be fun to play. Then from there, I think there's a lot of like not necessarily interesting but important features to do, like improving the controller support.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think it's hard to say like an exact date or even because who knows how much it'll be working on 4.0 versus doing updates for 3.0 as well. I
Yeah.
think my current thoughts are kind of that there's going to be some updates here that are focused on making the beta more fun. Then there'll be some updates focused on improving the quality, which will be things like having an in-game bug report form, um, doing some quality of life things like being able to sort your nearby inventory and use more of the menus with your controller. And then it'll be back to fun features like more guns and maybe a new map and some other like the features people are looking forward to.
Yeah. So that does it for my questions about 2.0. The next section is the future. Do you ever have any plans to make any other games outside of the survival genre? And if so, have you thought about what you might want to make?
Every so often, I kind of have a different idea of like, oh, it'd be fun to work on this. It'd be fun to work on that. But I think it's unlikely that they'll go anywhere. I think Unturned is kind of my project for the next few years, at least.
All
One
right.
idea that actually I've been thinking about a lot recently is that all the digital trading card games like uh, Hearthstone, even Artifact, are like they have these business models where you have to buy the packs and get a random chance of getting the different cards. Whereas I think it'd be
Mm-hmm.
cool to make a free to play card game where you just have all the cards and maybe you can like customize the cards, and that's how the game makes money, rather than.
That'd be interesting. So the last question about the future is: do you ever intend to bring more people on to Smartly Dressed Games, or would you rather keep it solo?
Development-wise, right now, uh, it's very it's looking solo. Uh, I have actually been talking with uh, Molten from the forums,
Yep.
and so he's going to college this year, and we were kind of talking about if he could help out on around the forums and the wiki and stuff as like a part-time job sort of thing. So it seems like that might be going ahead, or it is going ahead. So Smartly Dressed Games, 2 people. But then, of course, there's also everybody who doesn't necessarily work for Smartly Dressed Games directly, but is incredibly helpful and involved in the game, and like all the different curated map teams, all the plugin developers. So
Yep.
even if they're like not in,
Not employed by Smartly Dressed Games.
yeah.
They're still helping out.
Mhm.
That's really cool. All right, so that does it for all my questions. We're going to move on to the community asked questions. TPinso asks, why didn't you start way sooner on 4.0? Because you've lost a lot of people's attention.
I think I could have started sooner. I think I didn't want to start while I was working on 3.0. I think it was kind of a natural point to start, where 3.0 was sort of had accomplished everything that I'd set out to do before early access. I delivered on all the promises. At least I feel like I've. If you feel like I didn't, then let me know, and I'll try to do my best to fix that up. But I think 3.0 accomplished everything, and it was a natural point.
Yeah. MoonFlux asks, what would be the status of Unturned 3 once 4.0 comes out? Will there be one final update or only bug fixes and no more content?
I think there'll always be more updates. I mean, I've been working on 4.0 for almost 2 years now, and there's still lots of updates for 3.0, so I don't see that changing.
All right. Spebby asks, what are your plans regarding the curation system in 3.0? Would you consider reverting it if enough people were vocal about it? I think he's referring to the update where you have to subscribe to curated maps.
For context, he's one of the developers of Curated Maps. Right now, I don't have any plans to change it. I think players seem happy with it. I think, especially when it first came out, there was a lot of controversy with the map creator community. But I think it's the right choice for the game, and I don't have any plans to change it.
All right. The next question comes from SVG. Will there be a way to modify vehicles?
I assume that means like how 3.0 you build on top of the vehicle and expand it.
He goes on to say, if so, how intense? Like, can I turn my Civic into a lifted off-road machine?
That would be cool if you could adjust things like the suspension. I think when it comes to vehicle modification, it can get really complicated because if you have some like parameters that you adjust to change things like the suspension, then do you have like an item that does that, or is it part of the vehicle itself? Or if you allow just attaching wheels, then all of a sudden the physics has gotten a lot more complicated. So I think I don't have a fixed plan about that, but I do want to give more control over vehicles while reducing the craziness of like building a barbed wire wall coming off of your car.
Yeah. So the next question comes from Lusod, and he asks, will vehicles in Unturned 2 have specific damage regions, such as, for example, being able to disable the engine, helicopter rotors, tank turrets, and even stuff like rear view mirrors or ammo storage in vehicles?
So I think there definitely will be like specific hit points, like mentioned, maybe the helicopter, some mechanism of the helicopter rotors being a critical hit point, and tank engines especially being a critical hit point. I don't think I'd go so far as to have it that like shooting the hood of the car would damage the engine. I think since the hood is such a big target, it would feel kind of unfair to have your engine go down because you got shot there, which is sort of the stance I've taken about things like getting shot in the lung or getting shot in like your artery or something.
Yeah, it's more by chance.
Exactly. I think it's kind of a balance between the chance of hitting some critical thing versus intentionally aiming for the critical hit point.
Yeah. So when it comes to vehicles in Unturned 2 with guns, will you be able to reload said gun with ammo stored in the vehicle? So instead of players having to hop out and give each other like the HMG box, would they be able to store it in the vehicle and just reload from that storage?
I think that seems like a reasonable expectation. I think the kind of underlying question there is what sort of storage sharing would there be in the vehicles? And so then it's like, when you're in the car, do you have access to the trunk storage, or do you have to attach storage to the car? But at the very least, there could be like turret storage where you can put some extra ammo boxes in the turret to reload with. So I think there's a few options there, and I think it's reasonable to expect that there should be more options for at least turrets and especially for sentry guns, so that you don't have to go through them all individually.
Yeah. The next question comes from Froggo, and he asks, where do you see your game, both of your games, in the next 2 years?
I think 3.0, I'm hoping to bump up the quality a fair bit in the next 2 years, at least the quality of life sort of things, whether that be improving the netcode and improving load times, improving all these different things while there's more community content being added. And then in 2 years, I think I'd hope that 4.0 is in a nice playable state with a few maps and kind of the core features that you would expect. Probably similar to how 3.0 was a few years into development is where I'd hope 4.0 to be.
Awesome. The next questions come from Mr.Obi, and he asks, are you planning on making an editor again for administrators and servers and for single player in Unturned 2? And I think he's talking about the Freeform editor.
Okay. I think that makes sense to do. I think the first step is having a more unified way of building in the world, where 3.0 has the separate structures and barricade systems.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have just a generic buildable sort of thing, as well as it'd be nice to expose some of the different properties of them to the editor. Because I think it's not just about admins being able to do that, but there's a lot of creative potential if you can use kind of a simplified in-game editor to build complex things. And so I think it would make sense to do that.
All right. And the next question from him is, will you be able to paint your car without cosmetics so you can give it a cool look?
So I think the sort of suggestion people have in mind with that is something like I saw a cool spaceship game recently which had something like this where you could paint your ship, but being able to like graffiti on the car and spray paint it. And so then that can get complicated because you have to replicate this big texture to all the different players for the car, as well as then there's no like censorship of rude car styles. So there's definitely a lot of questions brought up with that. I do think it'd be cool to give more artsy tools to players, like being able to paint pictures or signs and write big signs. I think there's definitely a lot of interesting questions about modding cars, and there'll need to be a lot more thought on that.
Yeah. The next question comes from KidCudiLudi, and he asks, will you add new types of zombies?
Definitely. Sort of like we talked earlier about the different directions to take the enemies in the game. I think there's going to be a lot of new variety.
Awesome. The next question comes from Campy, and he asks, will there be Linux support?
Definitely. I think one of the benefits of doing official servers will be that the Linux server support should be better. And Like from the get-go, I've been testing the server on Linux, making sure everything's working well. And
Awesome.
I think there's going to be a lot of features for remote administration and automatic updating and all the sort of things you'd expect.
Very cool. The next two questions come from SirAdy, and he says, in an interview some time ago, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that the logo of SDG was originally a fez, a Doctor Who reference since you were a fan of the show. Since the current logo of SDG is just the name of your company, are you planning on working on a different logo in the future, one that would make it more recognizable?
Right now, I haven't really been giving the logo much thought. From time to time, I kind of think, well, first of all, it's sort of like, oh no, why did I call the company SDG? But I think it's kind of a unique name at this point. And as far as the logo goes, I think there's kind of a few different directions to take it. Like there's different ways of writing out the acronym or trying to come up with some sort of unique symbol. But as is, I think the character, like with the different colors, is fairly recognizable. And so I've kind of been thinking about updating the character icon to be using 4.0's character model. But other than that, I don't really have any plans.
All right. The last question from SirAdy is, are curated maps canon? Could certain curated maps be considered more tied into the official story than others, especially since, if I recall correctly, the Hawaii team had to change some things to avoid interfering with the official storyline, while Ireland had coalition presence on the map?
Um, I guess from my perspective, I feel like the curated maps aren't canon, whereas I imagine from players' perspectives, um, especially from a more casual perspective, that they are canon. So it's kind of a weird scenario. Um, and it's kind of unfair of me not to view them as canon. So I don't have a good answer to that.
It's all right. The next question comes from Korey. What are your plans for terrain on maps? What he means by this is it going to be more PvP centered terrain with stuff to hide and fight around, or and gain height advantage over your enemy?
Um, I think ideally there's a variety of uh, different sort of terrains. Germany had a lot of terrain problems. I think PEI has nice terrain. You have a fair bit of cover, and then there's also areas that do have a lot of height variation, whereas there's areas that don't. So
Yeah.
hopefully there's a nice variety as well as some nice cliffs and things.
All right. The next questions come from Danaby2, and he asks, why do cardboard boxes have material pallets?
I think at the time it was in order to give some more variety to places like the post offices. Um, and it was kind of like, well, adding this feature, although I guess if you're using them and trying to make them consistent, it must be a bit of a nightmare to paste them around. Although there is actually a feature in the dev kit where you can force them to be a specific palette index.
Interesting. The next question from him is, what music do you like and what do you not like?
um, let's see, what music do I like? I think I like a lot of um, like EDM sort of music. Um, in general, I don't really like music that has lyrics in it, but there's some exceptions.
All right. His last two questions are kind of related: Unity or Unreal Engine 4, and Scratch or C Sharp.
Uh, Unreal definitely, and C++, but C Sharp's also nice.
All right. The next question comes from XD, and he asks, what is the current state of Pineridge?
Um, Dead. I think Pine Ridge, there might be another map that's called Pine Ridge, but the original Pine Ridge is probably forever lost to time.
RIP. The next question comes from OnlyLlamaLiam, and he says, is your name really Nelson? Because it has been changed a lot.
um, I guess for context, originally I had an alias that I used online up until 2014 or 2013, but my name is Nelson, and I think it's been consistent since then.
Yeah. The next question comes from AnimaticFreak, and he asks, "What was your biggest fear when creating Unturned 3, and do you think it's still a valid fear for Unturned 4.0?"
I don't think I really was worried making 3. Like, it was a fun project, and 4 is definitely a fun project. I feel super lucky to be able to work on it every day, essentially. But I think especially when the whole green light thing was up in Flux, and it felt like it probably wouldn't be accepted because it got skipped the first time, that was definitely a little bit disheartening. And especially since I'd basically invested all the money I had into 3.0 for it to get passed over, that was really sad. And so I've invested, again, a lot of money into Unturned 4.0, and so I'm hopeful that it'll turn out well, and that it can be another like long-term project.
All right. The next question comes from Putin3D, and he asks, "How's Jasper the cat?"
He is doing well. He's actually napping on his bed right now.
All right, the next question comes from Phantomato, and he says, "What was it like being a high schooler and having this game you made grow to such a massive scale? Also, add your fellow Southern Alberta boy on Steam."
High school wise, I think there were some times that was kind of tricky to balance doing weekly updates with homework. Although for the most part, I think I like tried to cram every last second of school working time into school time. That when I was at home, I could be focusing on Unturned development. But I am very happy to be done school. I still have like nightmares that, oh no, back in high school, no time to work on stuff.
The next question comes from Elvibow, and he asks, "Will the scale of maps change somewhat coming into Unturned 2?" So I'm guessing he's talking about like the size.
Yeah, I think the max size is definitely bigger. Out of the box, Unreal recommends doing 20 kilometer by 20 kilometer as a max point. And so that's a bit over twice as big as 3.0's biggest maps.
Is that the large size?
That's
Like
the
roughly?
insane size. So
Oh, that's the wow.
yeah, so you can make really big levels if you want to. And I think there are some Unreal games that go that big. I
That's
think
crazy.
as far as the maps I make, I think it's unlikely that they'll go that big, but I think it'll be pretty quick before there's some community made maps that are huge.
Yeah. The next question comes from Gunturned, and he asks, "Can you nerf the Sportshot in Unturned 2?"
I think the Sportshot is once again going to be one of the most powerful guns in the game.
All right, the last questions come from Fleshy Pig, and he asks, "Are you adding chickens to the game?"
I think chickens confirmed.
All right, chickens confirmed. The next question is, "Unturned 2 going to be an Epic exclusive?"
Definitely not exclusive. Right now, I don't have any plans to do the Epic Store yet. I am really curious to see where they go with it, though, especially considering like they've got the game engine, they've got the store, but I think Steam has so many nice features like the Steam Workshop that, as well as not to mention Valve hosting the private beta. So I am not turning tail or turning coat, whatever the expression is.
All right. The last normal question from him is, "Raiding going to be similar to 3.0 in the sense that players will mostly focus on using ballistics instead of explosives to raid?"
Ballistics was definitely kind of a weird twist in the meta that I never would have guessed. I think ultimately it doesn't matter too much what method you use to destroy bases, but it would make more sense if the meta is to use explosives. I think it's kind of a nightmare balancing 3, whereas I think I have a few, I haven't made them yet, but I have a few tools in mind that I think will make it a lot easier to kind of get a big picture view of where all those sort of items are going and what's being used, and so and what's available. And I think that will really help with kind of finding a nice balance between things that maybe isn't there in 3.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed, feel free to hit the like button, and thank you so much to Nelson for joining me today. If you want to keep up with the development of Unturned II, feel free to follow Nelson on his Twitter at SDGNelson and check out his devlogs. Links are all in the description down below.